Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Everybody see and hear me clearly? And just get a thumbs up in the chat so I know that we can set this thing off. Get this party started. All right, cool. Shabbat Shalom, Princess Simcha, wife of Chief Peniel. All right, my brother. Shabbat Shalom to everybody in the chat. What people like to say, family online, right? And Shabbat Shalom to the house of Chief of Chiefs Eleazar, my brothers, the teachers, all of the chief men, and Princess Naomi. Let's get this thing set off. All right, we're gonna rise, give praises. Giving all honor and praise to the Most High God, who sitteth in the seat of judgment, whose throne is inestimable, the Lord of lords, God of gods, King of kings, the high and lofty one, who inhabiteth eternity, who has no counselor and none to consort with him. He who has reigned from the beginning, before any creature was formed, or any green shoot shot forth, before the foundations of the earth were laid, before the legions of angels first assembled. Yea, he who possessed wisdom ere the waters were parted asunder, or the winds of the firmament ever blew. He alone, the dreaded one, did reign, still reigns, and shall reign over all things forever. From everlasting to everlasting, El Shaddai, the Almighty God, the creator of all life, who made man in his own image, to whom he gave a heart of flesh, and has imparted him with the 5 operations of Elohim: eyes to see, ears to hear, smell, and taste, that he might enjoy the pleasures of eating and drinking, whereby he may obtain strength and healing from the foods and medicines of the earth that he made for him. And feeling also, both to the touch and in the inward parts, to know what was in his heart, whether he would serve Ha-Elohim, his maker, or no. And besides these, he endowed him with good sense and reason and speech to interpret the things that are seen and heard, that he might comprehend and articulate his thoughts, becoming fully aware, possessing the power to make sound decisions. And in his abounding loving kindness, he granted him understanding, yea, and knowledge also, that he might have withal to pursue the things that are pleasing to the Lord and depart from evil. He to whom all honor, worship, and praise is due, the omnipotent God, God of the Hebrews, who made the sea and the dry land, the God of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the God of Israel, the true and living God, the author of love, time, life, and sound, who spake and it was created, for all things are done at the words of his mouth, who breathed life, the one spirit, into our first father Adam, from whom we all are come to the world, which he made for the serving, nurturing, and nourishment of man, his most precious creation, to whom he gave his most righteous law, for righteousness belongeth to him alone, who is just in all things, who keep his covenant and mercy with them that love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations, even to the seed of his beloved friend Abraham, even to us, the children of Israel, Ben Isaac and Maccabim, sons of the ancient Maccabees. For he is our God, the ancient of days, for before the day was, is he, the God of the spirits of all flesh, El Qanah, the jealous God, El Rakhum, the merciful God, El Rapah, the God of healing, the one and only true healer, Hagadol, the great, Hagibor, the mighty, Wehanorah, and the terrible, Elohim Zebaot, the Lord of hosts is his name. He is the King of glory. Blessed be the glorious name of his kingdom forever and ever. For he is good, for his mercy endureth forever. Giving due respect to the chief men, princes, dignitaries, officers, mothers in Israel, brothers and sisters, I stand before you this day, Prince Zakaryah, a title bestowed upon me by the order of Chief of Chiefs Eleazar, Ben Lewi, Ben Dodo, aka Matitya, father of the house of the Maccabees, my teacher and leader, in whose honor I speak and continue the legacy of his name, works, and teachings, in the name of our God, and the holy law given us at the mouth of his prophet Moshe, reinstituted by and in accordance with the protocol set forth by Nasi Yaakov, head knock of all the Hebrews, teacher, leader and founder of Ben Isaacin, the first Hebrew Israelite congregation in the United States of America, whither we have been exiled because of our sins and the sins of our fathers, whom our God commissioned to bring his people together to the intent that he might open our eyes and give us ears to hear and a heart to perceive, as it is at this day, so that we may keep his commandments, return to him, and repair the breach. I bid you in the ancient tongue of our fathers, Shabbat Shalom Lechem.
Shabbat Shalom Laka.
Please remain standing as we recite the Constitution of Israel in Hebrew from Exodus chapter 20. Please repeat after me. וידבר אלוהים
וידבר אלוהים
את קהל הדברים
את כל הדברים
העלה לאמור
העלה לאמור
אנוכי אל שדי אלוהיך
אנוכי אשר אלוהיך
אשר הוצאתיך
אשר הוצאתיך
מארץ מצרים
מארץ מצרים
מבית עבדים
מבית עבדים
לא יהיה לך
לא יהיה לך
אלוהים אחרים
אלוהים אחרים
על פניי
על פניי
לא תעשה לך פסל
לא תעשה לך פסל
וקל תמונה
וכל תמונה
אשר בשמיים ממעל
אשר בשמיים ממעל
ואשר בארץ מתחת
ואשר בארץ מתחת
ואשר במים מתחת לארץ
ואשר במים מתחת לארץ
לא תשתחוו להם
לא תשתחוו להם
ולא תעבדם
ולא תעבדם
כי אנוכי אל שדי אלוהיך
כי אנוכי אשר אלוהיך
אל כהנה
אל כהנה
פוקד ההון
וכהן
אבות על בנים
אבות על בנים
על שילשים
על שילשים
ועל ריבעים
ועל ריבעים
לשונאי
לשונאי
ועושה חסד
ועושה חסד
לאלפים לאוהבי
לאלפים לאוהבי
ולשומרי מצוותיי
ושומרי מצוותיי
לא תישא את שם
לא תישא את שם
אל שדי אלוהיך
אשר אלוהיך
לשווא
לשווא
כי לא ינקה אל שדי
כי לא ינקה אל שדי
את אשר יישא
את אשר יישא
את שמו לשווא
את שמו לשווא
זכור את יום השבת
זכור את יום השבת
לקדשו
לקדשו
ששת ימים תעבוד
6 ימים תעבוד
ועשית כל מלאכתך
ועשית כל מלאכתך
ויום השביעי
ביום השביעי
שבת לאל שדי אלוהיך
שבת לאשר אלוהיך
לא תעשה כל מלאכה
לא תעשה כל מלאכה
אתה
אתה
ובנך
ובנך
וביתך
ביתך
עבדך
עבדך
ואמתך
ואמתך
ובהמתך
ובהמתך
וגרך אשר בשעריך
וגרך אשר בשעריך
כי ששת ימים
כי 6 ימים
עשה אל שדי
עשה אל שדי
את השמיים
את השמיים
ואת הארץ
ואת הארץ
את הים
את הים
ואת כל אשר בם
ואת כל אשר בם
וינק ביום השביעי
וינק היום השביעי
על כן ברק אל שדי
על כן ברק אל שדי
את יום השבת
את יום השבת
ויהי קדשהו
ויהי קדשהו
כבד את אביך
כבד את אביך
ואת אמך
ואת אמך
למען יאריכון ימיך
למען יאריכון ימיך
על האדמה
על האדמה
אשר אל שדי אלוהיך
אשר אל שדי אלוהיך
נותן לך
נותן לך
לא תרזק
לא תרזק
לא תנאף
לא תנאף
לא תגנוב
לא תגנוב
לא תענה
לא תענה
ברעך את שקר
ברעך את שקר
לא תחמוד
לא תחמוד
בית רעך
בית רעך
לא תחמוד
לא תחמוד
אשת רעך
אשת רעך
ועבדו
ועבדו
ואמתו
ואמתו
ושורו
ושורו
וחמורו
וחמורו
וכל אשר לרעך.
כל אשר לרעך.
Shabu, you may be seated. And all the people perceived the thunderings and the lightnings and the voice of the horn and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. And they said unto Moses, speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said unto the people, fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that ye transgress not. And the people stood afar off, but Moses drew near unto the thick darkness where God was. And the Lord said unto Moses, thus shall ye say unto the children of Israel, seen that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make with me gods of silver, neither shall you make unto you gods of gold. An altar of earth thou shalt make unto me, and shall sacrifice thereon thy burnt offerings, and thy peace offerings, thy sheep and thine oxen. In all places where I record my name, I will come unto thee, and I will bless thee. And if thou wilt make me an altar of stone, thou shalt not build it of hewn stones. For if thou lift up thy tool upon it, thou hast polluted it. Neither shalt thou go up by steps unto mine altar, that thy nakedness be not discovered thereon. Baruch Shemo.
Wow.
All right. As we can see, title of this video is similar to last week, a little bit different. We're going to be continuing to review the calendar and going into the names of the months, why they were named, what they were named, the names that were mentioned by God in the Torah, and then the names that were given to the months by our fathers before and post Babylonian exile or captivity. So with that said, we're going to be diving into the culture of our people because it is key to understanding the calendar and why we observe it the way we do. It's key to understanding that we were commanded this. The culture that is the culture of Israel stems from the order of life that God established in the law that He gave to Moses for His people, and because of those laws that construct or that formed the culture of Israel, this is why the calendar is observed the way it is, and there's reasons for why we celebrate the feast days at certain times, why it is neither a solar nor lunar calendar, but both the sun, the moon, and the stars were created for us to be able to keep track of days, months, years, right? As we read in Genesis chapter 1 a few weeks ago. We're also going to talk about why the calendar is the way it is today, reflecting on the sins of Israel. And I say this all the time. I'm going to reiterate. The world is the way it is because of the sins of Israel. So before we think to complain or blame or point the finger at the nations, let us first look in the mirror, because we are the reason why it is the way it is. There would be no New Testament if our fathers hadn't written it. There would be no calendar change if we hadn't turned aside from the laws of our God and abused each other and oppressed each other and violated the feast days, the new moons, and the Shabbats, right? So it is all because we wanted to be like unto the nations, right? And so we are in the position we are in because of this. That's why we are amongst them today. That's why we suffer from the sins of our fathers and our own sins, because their sins are our sins, right? Okay, so let's keep all of that in mind as we go over these topics today. Some of these concepts are going to be new to you as they were new to me when I was doing my research. But as always, we're going to back up all of our findings with verses directly from the book. And if it doesn't match up with the book, it's trash, right? So we don't count that as fact. And anything that can be proven as fact will match up with the book, because the book does not only teach us what words mean according to God's breakdown of the concepts of what words mean from Hebrew, which is the language that God spoke and gave us the law in, but also the law itself and the accounts in the book spoken from the perspective of God tells us right from wrong, right? And fact from fiction, right? So keep all of this in mind. And if anybody is going to teach anything otherwise, you might hear something different at other camps or some Jewish commentary that you might find and run into online. Always cross-reference your findings or their findings with the book. And if it can't be proven through the verses in the book, it can't be counted as truth. So with that said, let's jump right into where we left off last week. And I want to start by saying we are far from the culture of our people, right? And so here's where we learn about who we were, who we are supposed to be. Our life is way different today than it was back then in ancient times. Even if we were in our land today, so many things have been modernized just from the way we eat and acquire food. Back then we grew our own food. Today we go buy from a store, right? Even if you move to Israel today, you're going to be buying your food from a store or from merchants, right? And not growing our own. Because we are so far from that, there are things that we don't understand about the seasons, about the way crops are grown, about harvesting. And our calendar revolves around all of those things. And the Hebrew is key to understanding this part of our culture, because it describes why God commanded us to do things at certain times of the year, and why he called certain months the names that he called them in the Torah, right? And throughout the rest of the book, we're going to understand why our fathers gave those separate names to the months. All right, so I'm going to start reading these notes. Each of these notes that I've taken were from sources that I've cross-referenced, and all of them are going to lead us to verses in the book. Months, festivals, and leap years marked by agricultural events. Yes, leap years. And before we get into what I mean by a leap year, we did have leap years. And this is why you see on the Jewish calendar today, we have Adar 1 and Adar 2. I'm going to explain a little bit how that happened, when that happened, and if it matches up with what our fathers practiced, in the time of Moses and beyond that point, right? Now, why is all of this important? Anything that we can learn about the culture of our people is key to keeping the rest of the laws, because we have a lot of laws in here that deal with what we call our laws of the land, right? And a lot of times we think, well, this has nothing to do with how we treat people, when in actuality it has everything to do with how we treat people, because we were commanded what to do with our crops that we grow, that you toiled and put the works of your hands to. And then God is commanding you what to do with it. Aside from bringing it to the Levites as an offering for first fruits to give him thanks, he commands us what to do with the rest of that crop, right? And I think we went over this before. You end up with like 60% of your own crop, which means you're only getting almost a little bit more than half. You're getting a little bit more than half after doing everything that God said to do with your crop that you put in the work to grow. And why is that so important? Because it shows that when you're thankful to God, you will do what he commanded us to do with our substance. And it also proves to us that this life is not where our portion is. So, like I had to explain to someone the other day, this whole system that we're in, the matrix, the money system, it's not real. It's just a system that's been imposed on us to control us. You know what's real? Your family life at home. You know what's real? Going out and spending a day outside. And I'm not saying like, oh, we outside, we partying on the streets, like the nations do. No, go and enjoy God's creation. My brother Sean make fun of me all the time, and he call me on video sometimes and say, Chief Sean, sorry, excuse me. And he call me on video, and he'll find me like in the mountains somewhere hiking, or taking a walk on the mountains near the beach. And he would say, what you doing, man? You dragging my sister out there to do, to do what the white people do. You know what I mean? And I say, nah, actually my wife is good at planning these, and she's the one initiating this. And he's like, you lying. You know what I mean? But I'm thankful for that, because I'm the type, I'm okay, staying in, you know what I mean? But it's good for have somebody to remind you that we should appreciate the world, the beautiful things in the world, to travel, to get out, to see things that God created. It gives you a whole new perspective on what we should appreciate in life. It teaches us to be more thankful, and show gratitude for the things that God created for us, right? And also it does something to you. I don't know if you guys are familiar with grounding, walking barefoot in grass and dirt. I know people make fun of that. Mostly city dwellers make fun of that, but it's also, if you look it up, it's very good for our bodies, because we're connecting with the same minerals in the ground that we are made from. So it creates a certain reaction in our body that promotes healing. So there's a lot of things that people make fun of today because we don't understand, and we think it's weird to us because it's different to the way we grew up. And I'm starting it like this before I dive into this, because we're going to read about a culture that we are not familiar with, and the things that we're going to hear are going to seem a little strange. But once you see how everything matches up with the book, you're going to understand that we weren't made to live the city life. God made us to be dwelling in nature, okay, and self-sustained, growing our own food, right? All right. So we're starting off months, festivals, and leap years marked by agricultural events. In ancient Israel, the average barley harvest lasted between 3 and 6 weeks, though the broader grain harvesting season, interlocking with wheat, took exactly 7 weeks, 50 days, or rather, according to Torah, from beginning to end. All of our feast days were commanded around harvest times, right? A lot of these harvest times happen at the middle of the month, or were celebrated at the middle of the month, which is why we read last week in Psalms 81, or the week before, where King David said, in the time appointed on our full moon, we should be blowing up the trumpets, right? He said, on our new moon, on our feast days, on our appointed times, and in our full moon is what we understand that word bikaseh to mean, right? With an ayin at the end, right? And so looking at these things, I'm sorry, a hey at the end. And so when we're looking at these things and finding out the meanings of these words, it changes our perspective of things, because we always thought it meant when the moon hides herself, because kaseh or kasa is also hiding, but bikaseh, it means something different. It's a direct reference to the new moon, the full moon, right? And that because these feast days happened in the middle of the month. Feast of Unleavened Bread began on the 15th, right? And then the Feast of Booths begins on the 15th. And then if you do the math, the Feast of Weeks happens on the 13th of the month of Siwan, which is 2 days before the full moon, right? Because that's when the full moons came into the month, on the 15th day of the lunar cycle, right? 14th to 15th day. So, and we know that the months were set up according to the lunar cycle, but there were 30-day months, and that's why we celebrated a 3-day slot for the new moon. The first 2 days were the 29th and 30th of the month, and that 29th was the waning crescent, where you see the last small sliver of a crescent before the moon turns completely black, and that will be the 30th day. And then the first day of the month marked that first sighting of the new moon crescent, the smallest waxing sliver of the moon that appeared after that, and that would be the first day of the month, hence the name new moon, right? And in Hebrew, there's no word for month. It's just new moon, Kodesh. We call it month, but we have to stop thinking in English. We have to try to stop thinking in English and start thinking according to the Hebrew language, because this is part of our culture. And until we start to think according to the logic of the Hebrew language, we can't get in touch with our culture to be able to understand the things that God is showing us in these laws, not only according to observances, but how we're supposed to live our lives, the ways of God, how to treat people. It's all explained and intertwined with the logic of the Hebrew language, which we're going to get into a little bit more concerning specific laws as we go through this, right? Unlike Mesopotamia's flat river valleys, the ancient Israel terrain created a staggered timeline. Because elevations and microclimates varied wildly, barley matured at different times across the region. Why is the barley harvest so important? We're going to find out. Just bear with me. And again, stuff may seem a little boring, but as you go through it, we're going to start to uncover a lot of things that's going to make sense to us. And it clears up any confusion. Now, when God took away our feast days, we're going to get into how that happened because of our sins. So we're never going to get that back and do it exactly the way God commanded. So let's get that out the way first, right? This is not for us to figure out the calendar so that we could go back to doing it the way that God said. No, when your parents take something away from you, you accept that punishment, and you can't have it until they decide to give it back. So God took away our feast days, and we can't have it no more until he decided to give it back. What we're doing now is showing God that if we had it the way that he gave it to us, we would be doing it according to the letter. So you do your best to keep it with what we have according to the law that was given us throughout your generations, in all your dwellings. We know we can't bring offerings in Jerusalem on the Shabbat day, on the feast days, but we're keeping it according to what the law says throughout your dwellings, throughout your generations, in all your dwellings. So we're doing it to the best of our capabilities, keeping it exactly to the letter of the law as best we can, and to the fullest of our capabilities, right? And what God left for us. That's why we're not going to argue and change back the calendar, right? Okay, here's what we mean by harvesting times being different because of elevations, right? So historically documented by sources like the Jewish Encyclopedia and the ancient Gezer Calendar. If anybody's ever heard of, it said the harvest progressed through the distinct geographic and functional phases. So we'll talk about the geographic phases, why it happened earlier and later in certain times of the year for barley harvest and why that's important to our culture. And then why it went, how the harvest time went through functional phases, which is also very important for us to understand in understanding why and when we celebrate the month of Abib. Okay, so the Gezer Calendar, if anybody's have heard of that before, it was a stone tablet discovered in 1908 in the land of ancient Canaan, which is Israel, right? Because God gave us the land of Canaan. And it's a small stone with inscriptions on it, and it's the size of a phone or a small tablet. And it's made out of limestone dating back to the 10th century BCE. So we're talking 900 to 800 BCE, right? So this is the time of the kings, right? So Solomon was from David and Solomon lived from in the 1000 to the 900 period during that time, and a few of the kings after them, and then we're well into the time of the kings from 900 to 800. So during this time is when this when they believe this stone was made, and it's the era of the early Israelite kingdom. Written in an early alphabetic script known as Paleo Hebrew. Something else I learned, what we have been taught is the ancient Hebrew is what archaeologists and historians refer to as Paleo Hebrew. The ancient Hebrew is the Hebrew that uses pictographs, where the Aleph looks like an ox's head, right? And the Lamed looks like an actual staff. And there's meanings behind these things because Aleph also means a calf or an ox, and the Lamed is also shaped like a staff because it represents leadership and learning. And the shepherd is one that guides, which is also one of the definitions of Lamed, right? So the letters have meaning, but not to dive too deep into that subject of the alphabet, which we'll touch on later dates to dig into certain words concerning the law so that we could get a better understanding. But just to mention that that was the ancient Hebrew alphabet, and what we call the ancient Hebrew, which is actually an alphabet and not a pictograph system, is referred to as the Paleo Hebrew, right? So it is likely a farmer's harvesting roadmap. Right, and so this is what this tablet looked like, and it was inscribed here. Let me see if I could. Actually, I'm not going to waste our time with that. Everybody could Google on their phone Gezer Calendar, Gezer, and if you want to take a look at it, and it's a tablet that is inscribed in Paleo Hebrew, right? And what it says on it is 2 months of olive gathering, and that would happen during our months. I'm going to give you the corresponding months according to the months of the Gregorian calendar that we're familiar with, so we know what time of year this happened. 2 months of olive gathering, September to October. 2 months of grain sowing, November to December. 2 months of late planting, January to February. 1 month of cutting or harvesting flax, March. 1 month of reaping, harvest, or barley, which is April, and this is the exact harvest window. The month of reaping or harvesting wheat and measuring grain would have been in May, or May to June. We have to understand that the months don't line up perfectly with the Gregorian calendar. So it's like month May to June, then June to July, right? So 2 months of vine pruning, which would have been May to June, June to July, or June to July, July to August, depending on how the calendar fluctuates between times, because the dates weren't the same, right? The months were not matching up the same every year. And that's why certain years we notice that we celebrate, the Feast of Unleavened Bread beginning on a Monday or a Sunday. And then the following year, the first day is on a Wednesday or a Thursday. And that's because the calendar doesn't match up with the Hebrew calendar, the Gregorian calendar that we observe today. 2 months of vine pruning, June, July. 1 month of summer fruit, August. This tablet perfectly mirrors the geographic calendar of the Judean foothills and highlights how central the barley and wheat cycle was to the rhythm of ancient Israelite society. So before we go forward, I'm going to cite a verse in the book. We're going to go to Exodus chapter 9, because this is key to understanding what we were eating during the period when we exited Egypt and what we made our feast, our unleavened bread from, right? And it's also going to teach us a little bit of, help us understand a little bit of how we observe the month of Abib, because we keep reading that throughout the law. Observe the month of Abib. In the month of Abib, you came out of Egypt. You shall observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread in the month of Abib, right? So we need to understand what that is saying. So Exodus chapter 9, you got that?
Yeah.
If we go to verse 31, let's back up a little bit. Let's go to verse 29. Now, this is during the time of the plague of hail, right? When God sent down hail that was on fire, right? The water forgot his quenching nature, and the fire forgot his power, and the elements were changed in themselves, because the creation serves the creator to benefit the creature at the will of the creator, right? And so this is during that time that we're reading about. This is just before the plague of the death of the firstborn, and then right after that we left Egypt. We departed Egypt on that same night, right? So let's go to Exodus chapter 9, verse 28. Okay, verse 27. Got it? Let's do this. Let's do a little quicker, okay?
Yeah.
All right.
And Pharaoh sent and called for Moses and Aaron and said unto them, I have sinned this time. The Lord is righteous, and I and my people are wicked. Entreat the Lord, for it is enough, that there be no more mighty thunderings and hail, and I will let you go, and ye shall stay no longer. And Moses said unto him, as soon as I am gone out of the city, I will spread abroad my hands unto the Lord, and the thunder shall cease, neither shall there be any more hail, that thou mayest know how that the earth is the Lord's. But as for thee and thy servants, I know that ye will not yet fear the Lord God. And the flax and the barley was smitten, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was bold. But the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up. And Moses
said, right there, cut it right there. Now this is important, because it lets us know that the flax and the barley were smitten, and the wheat and the spelt were not smitten. Now this tells us that there were two different harvest times for grains, and the barley and the flax were harvested first, and then the wheat and the spelt were harvested later. The reason why the flax and the barley were smitten, it said because the barley was in the ear. In Hebrew, it doesn't say the barley was in the ear. It says, to get a clearer translation, it says, the barley was, one second here, let me pull that up. The barley was Abib, is what it says. The barley was Abib. We've been told that Abib means fresh or first shoots, and that's actually what you're going to find in some dictionaries. But there's always a little bit more depth to these Hebrew words depending on the dictionary that we're using, right? Or dictionaries that we're using, because we should be always cross-referencing and using more than one dictionary, right? I especially like a dictionary that I use that's called the Hebrew and English Lexicon of the Old Testament, with an appendix, including the Aramaic, with a breakdown of the Aramaic. And there's 3 different publishers that all have different dictionaries on their own. So there's Briggs, there's Driver, and there's Brown, and they all have separate dictionaries, but they collaborated on this, and they did not only give definitions to the words according to what they mean today in modern Hebrew. They cited verses in the book every time a specific word was used. And since we know, or those of us that study, every word in Hebrew, if you look it up in the dictionary, you must find the 3-letter root or 2-letter root to that word. And then we have to understand prefixes and suffixes, masculine and feminine, past, present, and future, conjugations, to be able to understand how that root word was used in this specific verse of the book, right? Well, this book gives us a breakdown for every single time that root word was used in a conjugated form everywhere in the Old Testament, and cites the verses to give us a better understanding of what it means in those verses, right? And also something I've learned, that these Hebrew words don't just mean one thing in this verse and it means something different in another verse. They all have shared meaning elements, meaning it means everything that this word means in all of these verses. And that's part of the logic of the Hebrew language that we need to understand. The meanings slightly differ in context, but they still have shared meaning elements. And when we add the other meanings of the different conjugations of the same root word in other contexts, we get a better understanding of what it means in this specific context, right? So it's not just green or shoots, right? What it does say is, in the Hebrew, in the dictionary, Hebrew and English lexicon of the Old Testament, giving us references with appendix containing the biblical Aramaic. So the word Abib means specifically fresh, young ears of barley. Not just young ears, it means of barley. It's also, so anytime you read Abib, especially if we read Ha-Abib, because this says the barley was Abib, right? And it's telling us that Abib is a specific time frame of the ripeness of the barley crop, right? Why is that important? Because this is going to tell us when we observe the month of Abib, right? If you do the math, 28 days times 12 give you 354 times 13. 350, I believe you do the math, and it's 13 months. If you do 28 days, that's 364 days, right? And that's a lunar cycle. And if we continue to count the months like that, 13 months of 28 days, it's going to go off. And in a few years or 10 years, we're not going to be celebrating Abib or the Feast of Unleavened Bread at the same time every year. It's going to move. It's going to fluctuate. So this is why God was commanding us through the law to observe when is the Abib in the barley harvest. Again, you're going to hear some concepts that sound strange, but we're going to go into the book to prove these points using the law, using the verses in the law, right? So came out of Egypt observing a 12-month, 30-day calendar that was a lunar solar calendar. God is now commanding us as we come out of Egypt, this is how you observe the calendar. And it's not according to lunar or solar or both combined. It's according to agricultural events that I'm going to teach you how to observe in order for you to keep the days that I'm commanding you to observe at their specific appointed times during specific harvest times for a reason, because it was at the time of the Abib stage of the barley harvest that we left Egypt. And that is why we should remember this time, because God delivered us out of Egypt. And it's important to remember at the exact time of year, during what season, during what harvest, and at what stage of the harvest, so that we don't forget, right? And I'm going to explain further, okay? It also means a month of ear forming, meaning the ear forming is when the barley, the head of the barley, the plant itself is no longer green. It's changing colors to light beige. It's lightening in color. And it's the first time when you can actually eat the barley, right? Anytime before that, you cannot eat it. Although if you eat it in the month of Abib, you must parch it first, means you have to toast it. That's why we read about parched grains. And there's a reason why that verse in Leviticus 23 says green ears or parched grains, right? We're going to go into that in a second, but let's finish the definition of Abib, right? Or of growing green, Abib, month of Exodus and Passover. All of this is a definition of Abib, right? Okay, so going back, now that we can understand from Exodus chapter 9, this is why the barley was destroyed at the time we came out of Egypt, because it already started to ripen, which means the plant is a little more brittle at this time. When a grain grows on a grass, and when a grass is grown at ripening stage, it is light brown. Have you ever seen a field of wheat where it's light tan, light brown, looks blonde? And that's the time when the plant is most brittle. It is very subject to weather. If it rains, if it hails, it will destroy the crop, right? So this is why it didn't rain during those times until we started sinning, right? And this is where those abnormal weather patterns can come from sin, right? And so the barley was smitten because of the hail when God destroyed Egypt, destroying their crops, because none of the crop in Goshen was touched. So none of our barley or flax was smitten, right? But in Egypt, it was smitten, right? And so the flax was in bloom, is what it says, gibol, which was in bloom. And that's why, because it was in bloom, the plant got destroyed, the crop got destroyed. But the wheat and the spelt were not smitten because they ripened late, is the word for afilot, or the translation. But afilot actually means they were still darkened. And when these plants grow, they grow dark green first to light green, and then to a tan. They change colors from green and transition to green with streaks in them of light brown or tan, and then they turn blonde when they're fully ripe. And this is the transitioning point of the harvest season for these grains. And then God told us specific times when we should harvest. Now it's going to help us understand not only the calendar, but how we lived, right? Why we observed the feast at certain times, and why we should remember it at those times, because this was the season that God delivered us out of Egypt. Right. And it's going to help us understand Leviticus 23 a little bit more of when the Shabbat comes, when we're supposed to start counting the Omer. Right. And the spelt were not smitten, for they ripened late, or they were still dark green. Right. So spelt, and it doesn't say rye, it says spelt. The wheat and the spelt ripen later. Right. And that's what we were harvesting just before the 50 days of the Feast of Weeks was up. Right. Because each took time. Right, so here, let's go back to these notes so we can understand this a little bit better. Now, why is all this important, man? We need to hear the laws that we could do. Bear with me. Okay. The reaping phase. Laborers cut the standing stalks using flint-bladed or bronze sickles. The cut stalks were immediately tied into sheaves and left in heaps across the fields. For a single farm or estate, cutting the barley took a few weeks before transitioning to the next steps. Right? So it was a time when we harvested for weeks. We didn't just cut it down all in one day and it dried in a day and we were ready to eat. This is a thing that took weeks. And it started from anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks for the barley, and the total season lasted for 7 weeks, which is why it was a 7 weeks of us counting the Omer and the 50th day. Hey, you, Josiah, tap him for me. Wake him up. Stand up. Go put water on your face. Don't fall asleep. This is not nap time. May not be the most intriguing part of what you want to hear right now, but go put water on your face and come back and pay attention. The sheaves were transported via carts or donkeys. Sheaves. Why is that important for us to understand what a sheaf is? Because that's what the book refers to as an omer. To communal outdoor threshing floors. Why is that important? Because it's understanding that the threshing floor of Araunah was on an elevated surface, and that became the building for the Temple Mount. That became the Temple Mount where Solomon built, where David first offered an offering, which we read a few weeks ago, when the angel stood over Jerusalem with his sword drawn. And David ran up to the threshing floor of Araunah, which was an elevated, flattened plain of limestone bedrock that was exposed, and then that's how they treaded out the harvest, right? The grain. They would have donkeys tread on it, and behind them would be like a wooden plank that they would sit on or stand on while the ropes were connected to the ox or the ass, and they would walk over the grain. They would trample it, and that wooden plank that we'd be sitting or standing on would be crushing the grain also. At a certain time of the day this was done, and we're going to learn why. That was the same spot, the threshing floor of Araunah, is where David decided the temple would be built, and he designed it. But God said he couldn't build it because he had blood on his hands. It wasn't murder blood, it was the blood of war. And because he had blood on his hands, God would not allow him to build a holy temple to house the name of our God. So he commanded that his son would build it. Don't lay down. He commanded that his son would build it. And Solomon built it on top of the threshing floor of Araunah, and which was purchased by David at the time he sent up an offering. Yes, King David sent up an offering and was accepted of God, and he pacified God's anger and stayed the hand of the angel that it did not destroy anymore in Jerusalem, and the plague was stopped. That's at the same spot where that happened, is where the Temple Mount was built. That is also the same spot where Abraham was commanded to go sacrifice yonder when he was going to sacrifice Isaac. Okay, check it out. It's all in the book. Interlocking grain season. In biblical and agricultural tradition, the barley harvest served as the kickoff to the overarching grain season, meaning the barley harvest and the wheat grain overlapped each other, and the wheat harvest overlapped each other. While we're still harvesting barley, it's time to now cut down the wheat. It began at the cutting of the Abib. Now, stop thinking the way we've been reading in English, but start to think about the Abib, which is the time that the barley is becoming first ripe, at the first sign that the barley is turning ripe. It means nearly ripe, right? Barley. During Passover, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, during mid-Abib, where the first fruits of the wave sheaf, which is the omer, was offered, right? So let's go to Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23, and go to verse 11. And he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord.
And he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted for you. On the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. And ye shall offer that day when ye wave the sheaf and he lamb without blemish for the first year for a burnt offering unto the Lord. And the meat offering thereof shall be 2/10 deals of fine flour mingled with oil, an offering made by fire unto the Lord for a sweet savior, and the drink offering therefore shall be of wine. Thereof shall be of wine, the fourth part of an hin. And ye shall eat neither bread nor parched corn nor green ears until the selfsame day that ye have brought an offering unto your God. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings.
Another reason why we don't eat grains during the Feast of Unleavened Bread is because this offering happened during the barley harvest, or at the setting off of the barley harvest, when the grains were in Abib, when barley was at the stage of the Abib, right? Which is the first ripening stage of barley. Right, so why we were commanded not to eat parched grains, which is the quali, is because that's what the barley was called when you are first able to eat it in the Abib stage, if it's picked in the Abib stage, right? So what happens is the barley grows with a seed, and then that seed fills up with water, right? That seed fills up with liquid, with water that is sucks through the plant into the seed. You can't pick it during that time. You can't eat it. If you try to roast it during that time, the seed's going to dry out and you're going to come out with an empty shell. You can't eat nothing and dry it out at that time, because then the water in it is going to dry up and you're going to be left with an empty shell. So instead, they waited until the time of the Abib, which is the first part of the ripening stage of the barley harvest, and then they would pick it and parch it at that time. And that's when the first mass would be grown in the inside of the barley seed, right? And then they would, here, let's go over this real quick. So what is Abib? It indicates a stage in the development of the barley crops. This is clear from Exodus 9:31, which describes the devastation caused by the plague of hail. We just read through that verse. The above passage relates that the barley, or Exodus 9:31-32, relates that the barley crops were destroyed by the hail while the wheat and spelt were not damaged. To understand the reason for this, we must look at how the grain develops. When grains are early in their development, they are flexible and have a dark green color. That's why I said the wheat and the spelt were darkened, afilot, right? And that's why they hadn't grown up yet. They weren't damaged by the hail. As they become ripe, they take on a light yellowish hue and become more brittle. The reason that the barley was destroyed and the wheat was not is that the barley had reached the stage in its development called the Abib, and as a result had become brittle enough to be damaged by the hail. In contrast, the wheat and spelt were still early enough in the development at the stage when they were flexible and not susceptible to being damaged by hail. The description of the wheat and spelt as dark afilot indicates that they were still in the stage when they were deep green and had not yet begun to lighten into the light yellowish hue, which characterizes ripe grains. In contrast, the barley had reached the stage of the Abib. At the time, it was no longer dark. At this point, it probably had begun to develop golden streaks. Okay, we know from several passages that barley, which is in the state of the Abib, has not completely ripened, but has ripened enough so that its seeds can be eaten parched in fire. Parched barley was commonly eaten food in ancient Israel and is mentioned in numerous passages in the Hebrew Bible as either Abib, parched kwalui, parched in the fire, which is kwalui in Leviticus chapter 2, verse 14, which we can read. And it says, and if thou bring a meal offering of the first fruits unto the Lord, thou shalt bring for the meal offering of the first fruits, grain in the ear, parched with fire. It's still in the ear because it's not fully ripened, but you could parch it in fire, even groats of the fresh ear. And in the Hebrew, it says the word for first fruits of grain in the ear, it says geresh carmel. It means crushed grain, crushed fresh barley, right? And that's why we know that carmel means that fresh grain. And King James did not translate it the same in both chapters, because we see in Leviticus 23 where it says fresh grains, fresh ears for barley in Leviticus chapter 23. But there's correlation in the definition of the word carmel that gives us a sense of what it's talking about. Okay, or in its abbreviated form, parched, which means kwali, which is what we find in Leviticus 23. While still early in its development, barley has not yet produced large enough and firm enough seeds to produce food through parching. This early in its development, when the head has just come out of the shaft, the seeds are not substantial enough to produce any food. At a later stage, the seeds have grown in size and have filled with liquid. At this point, the seeds will shrivel up when parched and will only produce empty skins. Over time, the liquid is replaced with dry material or mass, and when enough dry material has amassed, the seeds will be able to yield barley parched in the fire. And that's why it tells us about eating the parched grain during the time of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or on the morrow after the Shabbat. You cannot eat it during the Feast of Unleavened Bread until you bring your offering on the morrow after the Shabbat, is what we read in Hebrew in Leviticus chapter 23. So we know that this is the morrow after the Shabbat of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and that the Feast of Unleavened Bread ends on a Shabbat. Okay. The month of Abib is the month which commences after the barley has reached the stage of Abib. Don't worry, we get into something. 2 to 3 weeks after the beginning of the month, the barley has moved beyond the stage of Abib and is ready to be brought as the wave sheaf offering, matching up with what the book says, which means our harvest times were correlated with the times of the feast days. So if the barley was not ready to be harvested, then we could not begin observing the month of Abib. So you're saying, what am I saying? That the month of Abib didn't come at the same time every year? No. The leap year was determined by, in the 12th month of the month Abdar, they would observe the barley crop. If it was close to the time of Abib, then the next new moon would be the 1st of Abib. If the time of the Abib had not yet come and the barley was not close to that stage yet, then we would add a leap year. And a leap year for us didn't mean adding a day. A leap year for us meant adding another month. So that month was called Adar Beit, or the second Adar, or Adar 2. And this was also commanded because God is teaching us through the law. If you go to Deuteronomy 16, and this is why the Hebrew is so important, that God is teaching us to observe the time of the Abib. It's not necessarily the name of the month. It's what God is calling the time of the first ripening of the barley, because that's what Abib means. It's specific to barley, the barley harvest. Why is it so specific and God so specific according to the barley harvest? Because it commemorates the exact time when he brought us out of Egypt. And that's the whole point of us observing this feast. So the whole month is to be observed because of the season that he brought us out of Egypt. And I know we read that in Exodus 12 and 13. Remember this, that this is the same night in the season that God brought your armies out from Egypt, right? So if you go to Deuteronomy chapter 16, and it says, observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover. Well, let's see what it says in Hebrew. Shamor et Kodesh ha-Abib. Observe the new moon of the Abib. It doesn't say Shamor et Kodesh Abib, as if Abib is the name of the month. Instead, God is referring to the Abib, which is the time that the barley is at its first stage of the harvest. And that's why this is important for us to understand the calendar, because God is teaching us that it has nothing to do with only sun and moon. And we should not base our calendar on a cycle of the sun or a cycle of the moon. Get out of that mindset, because that's where you left from, in Egypt, where they worship sun and moon. So now let me teach you how to observe the calendar. And I'm going to teach you a new thing, which is how to observe the calendar according to the time of the season that I brought you out of Egypt at the barley harvest. And I did that for a reason, so that you guys will no longer be hooked to a calendar that is calculated by the cycles of the sun and the moon. But you have to calculate it according to the cycles of both, because both influence the harvest of times and of the seasons, right? And so this is the whole purpose of our culture, is that we were agricultural people. We were agricultural people because God centered our feast days around agriculture. And so this is why we were shepherds and farmers, because God is teaching us, this is the way I set up for you guys to live. This is how you're going to know when to observe the month of Abib, by watching your barley harvest. And if it's a time of year when, because there's a certain 19-year period called the Metonic period. And so things start to overlap. When you are calculated according to the sun only, or according to the moon only, or according to 12 months at 30 days, seasons begin to overlap. And after a while, you're going to be a day late or a week late, 6 days early for your harvest. Check it out. Do the research. It took me a while to compile all of this. And I had to, as I'm looking things up, I said, I can't just go for this Jewish commentary or for this scientific astrology of watching sun and moon. It has to match up with the book before I say that's solid. And this is where we find where God is teaching us it's not about the sun only. It's not about the moon only. It's not about a combined lunar solar calendar. It's about observing the time of the month when God told us that the first ripening of the barley. Stand up and get on point and stand right here. I want to be able to see you so I can see if you're falling asleep. Okay? Pay attention. Okay? Thank you very much. Hold your head up. You're a Maccabee. Stand tall and proud. Okay? This is your heritage we're learning about. I know it's not the most interesting. I'm not going through the story of Samson. I know we're not talking about Moses parting the Red Sea and all those Bible movies that you're so interested in. I know we're not talking about that real stories right now to give you a breakdown. But this is also important to our culture and who we are as a people. Okay? Okay. These are our ancestors that we're reading about and how God commanded us to live. All right. So this is telling us that God is teaching us that the calendar that he set for us to observe is set according to the barley harvest, because we should be thankful to him during this time, because it's the time he brought us out of Egypt, number one. Number two, it's the time he caused our crops to grow. Number three, it's the time that he showed us when to harvest so that we could offer offerings in giving thanks to him at the appropriate time of the year, and that it's not going to happen at that time if we follow the lunar solar calendar, or just the lunar calendar, or just the solar calendar, to prove that man don't run it, God run it. I told you I was getting to something. I know it's a little boring until we got here, but this is God teaching us that he's going to teach us how to observe our calendar to the way he made the crops grow. And sometimes it's going to happen at the same time, but that time is not always going to correlate with the lunar calendar or with the solar calendar or with the lunar solar calendar, because their times don't match up perfect. So God's telling us when to start beginning to count the month of Abib. And it just so happened that if we do it that way, the 21st day of the month of Ha-Abib, the first ripening stage of barley, would land on the Shabbat. And that's how we're going to know and prove that God is real and that our God is God and he controlled the seasons. And even though everybody else's calendar ended up on a different time of the year, ours does not, because we watching the Habib to when to start counting that first day. And it matches up perfectly with God commanded in Leviticus 23, where every year, if we do it the way God commanded to observe the month of Ha-Abib, as we read in Deuteronomy chapter 16, which means we're watching the barley harvest before we decide if this is going to be the new moon of Ha-Abib, or if it's not ripened, we got to wait another month. But when we do it that way, the Shabbat is always going to be on the 21st, the 7th, the 14th, the 21st, and the 28th of every first month of the year during Ha-Abib. And this is not the only chapter that says Ha-Abib. You go to Exodus chapter 23. Go to verse 15, Exodus 23. When I say go to Exodus chapter 23, you should already be on it. All right? You're doing great, man. But I got to sharpen you, man. That's the way I was taught. I got to sharpen you. I got to be, hey, come on, listo.
Verse 15?
Verse 15, Exodus 23.
Why is it so small?
That's okay. Fix it. You got it. Now go down. Be on point. Yeah, verse 15.
Thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread. Thou shalt eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded thee, in the time appointed of the month of Abib. For in it thou camest out from Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty.
No, you ain't gonna appear before him empty, because you got to bring your first harvest that we just read about after the Shabbat of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You got to bring your offering. And until then, you can't eat the parched barley, the toasted barley of the Abib stage. You can't eat the fresh grains of the Carmel. This is when it's fully ripe. And no, it sounds the other way around, but the parched barley was when it was in the Abib stage and it wasn't fully ripened. And the Carmel is when it's fully ripened, but it's fresh. Like if you ever ate edamame, the soybeans haven't been dried out yet, but they're at the fully ripening stage. That's the Carmel of the barley. And that's when you're supposed to bring those offerings of that stage. Why is it mentioned parched quali of the barley and then Carmel of the barley, two different stages of harvest? Because like I mentioned to you earlier, when we read about the different harvest times, because the land of Israel was not all the same elevation. We had highland and lowlands. We had plains and we had mountainous regions. Barley did not harvest at the same time for every region. Also, we had a northern kingdom, which were commanded to bring their first fruits 3 times in a year. That's what we read about in Leviticus chapter 2. So did not correlate at the same times of every year. If the lower regions, they ripen faster. At the higher region, they ripen slower. So the higher region will be bringing their barley in the Abib stage, right? When the lower region will be bringing their barley in the Carmel stage. And this is why we see both of those words mentioned in Leviticus 23. There's a reason for everything. We just need to learn our culture, our history, and the reason why God commanded these things. And it's for us at the end of the day, all of this knowledge is not for us to say, "Ooh, I'm smart, I figured it out." No, it's for us to be more thankful to God for everything that he gives us. And we show him that by bringing offerings to him. You can't bring offerings today. So what do you offer? Not just the calves of your lips. You offer yourself. Not, hey, this ain't, that was metaphorical. Don't take me the wrong way. You know, we ain't into no Jake stuff over here. But how you offer yourself is you give up your own wants, desires, what we call needs that are not needs, but our lusts. We give that up. We give up the old way of thinking. We give up the knowledge of things that were taught and allow God to teach us a new way of thinking. Don't say, man, I don't know about that. You telling me they watch the barley every year to learn when to start counting? This is what it's telling us. It says in the month of the Abib, not the month Abib. Let's read it. Et Chag Hamatzot, verse 15, Exodus 23. The feast of unleavened bread, Tishmor, thou shalt observe, or thou shalt keep. Shabbat Yamim, 7 days. Tokal Matzot, thou shalt eat unleavened bread. Ka'asher Ziwitika, as according to which I command thee. Limoed Kodesh, in the appointed time of the new moon, Ha'abib, of the new moon of the Abib. Abib is a direct reference to a certain stage of ripening of the barley harvest. This is why in English it says month Abib, because it's a mistranslation of God telling us during the time of the first ripening stage of the barley. And if we don't know anything about agriculture, or if the person translating this didn't know anything about the agricultural practices of the ancient Hebrews in that region, then they wouldn't understand what times barley ripened, the stages of how it ripened, and that wouldn't give us an accurate translation of how we can translate these verses. So we would just say, oh, it must be telling us that the name of the month is Abib, and it means first shoot. So yeah, it correlates with springtime. No, we were commanded according to the way things and that specific barley grain is harvested in that region, because in Goshen and in Israel, that time is the same time of year. In Egypt, Goshen, in Israel, that happens at the same time of year, because it's all in the same what's the word? Distance from the equator, to where certain things happen in harvest times with grain at a certain time of year. We have to look at these things from outside of what we've been taught and go exactly what the book is telling us. Now, another thing that we need to note while we're going through this, oh man, it's a bunch of information that we don't even need. Just do the calendar of what God left us. Yeah, that's fine. We could do that. But you know what else this teaches us? That why we were commanded to bring these offerings is to show thanks to our God. Why are we commanded to eat the Feast of Unleavened Bread? To show thanks to our God, to commemorate the season he brought us out from slavery. Now also, what else we should be understanding is that when God gives us the understanding of why he commanded us to do these things, we also see that God is who sets up according to when the barley is going to ripen, and it's not going to correlate with man's calendar, but only God's calendar. So now we trust God to the point and believe God to the point where we're never going to believe nothing that man says over what God said in the Torah, because their calendars are faulty. And if we do it according to their calendars, it won't match up with what God commanded us on how to observe the Abib, because that time will be different every so many years. And so it teaches us to rely on everything. This is just one example to teach us that everything that God says in the Torah, we should take literally word for word and keep it according to what God said, and trust that word as our foundation for the truth of all facts. And whatever we hear from man, whatever studies, scientists, historians, whatever they bring to the table, whatever we was taught in school, we have to bounce it off of the law first. And if it don't match up with what we read in these first 5 books, it ain't the truth. It's faulty. It's garbage. It's basura. It's ashpa. It's trash. So this is what this lesson is about. Teaching us that through this understanding of how we were taught to observe, to count our calendar, and God is breaking us away from the mentality that we learned in Egypt, we must also break away from the mentality of what we learned in America and stop following, because we don't even realize it. We're still following the ways of Egypt. We're still following. And we don't realize it because we're following the practices and the cultures on how they taught us to observe time. And God has given us a whole different perspective of how. And that way that God gave us, we have to be thankful to him. We have to understand that he controls everything. Then we begin to rely on him. Then we begin to believe him. And when we start to read other parts of the book, we say, man, this is the God that controls the harvest time. This is the God that controls whether I eat or not. This is the God that gave me everything I got. You ain't growing your own food, but everything you got in your store, because that's what your storehouse is, your cabinet, your refrigerator, that's your storehouse that you read about when he says, cursed be thy basket, cursed be thy store. Your basket is the fruits you got on the table, on the countertop. What's your store? Those canned foods that you got in your cabinet, the dried beans, the dried rice that you got in your cabinet. That's the storehouse. Your refrigerator is the storehouse because it's meant to preserve food for long keeping, for long storage. If we understand this, then we start to show our thanks to God through action, through stepping up our game with the law, by being honest, to know that we owe and that we are in debt. But you know what I learned? If I don't feel like I owe you for the good that you did me, and I see you, I still talk to you, even if we far away, I still talk to you, or I see you on a video call or something, or we might live in the same space and I see you guys regularly, you know, every Shabbat or I come through during the week or some of us live together. If I can't show gratitude and thankfulness to the person that did me good that I see daily or periodically, what make you think I'm going to show thanks and gratitude to a God that I've never seen with bodily eyes? That's human nature. That's psychology. Let's not walk around like we fronting talking about how thankful we are to God, and we ain't making sacrifices for these laws. You ain't willing to cut off what you like. You ain't willing to put down your foot in your household. You ain't willing to say, hey, I'm not doing this no more. Because then we're not thankful. We say we thankful. But I noticed that God puts mirrors in front of us every day. And as I teach my children these lessons, I notice that's a mirror for myself. I tell my son, don't say you thankful if you're not showing you thankful. I tell my sons, don't say you love if we're not showing that we love, because the words and the actions ain't matching up. The action that you did, was that love or was that hate? It was hate. Okay, good. Thank you for being honest. It shows that we're getting somewhere. No, but it wasn't like that. But we ain't getting nowhere. And then this is a mirror for me to look at myself before God. Because as I'm looking at my son and in the rebuke, or my sons rather say, you know, it often happens one at a time. And I'm looking at him in his eyes at that time, I'm seeing a mirror image of myself. Because I'm like, this is how God looking at me. When I'm fronting, when I'm making excuses, when I'm not admitting my guilt, when I'm not accepting my fault, when I'm still remaining in my pride, when I'm not being honest with myself. And I said, ain't no way I'm going to be up teaching my children these things on a daily basis and up here teaching every Shabbat. And I'm not going to think that I should hold myself accountable to these same words, because y'all don't see me throughout the week. Y'all ain't over my shoulder. I ain't got nobody telling me, hey, watch it, don't do that. I'm by myself. Everywhere I go, I'm the only one. But that's okay, because you could put me in Timbuktu. You could put me in China, and I'm going to still be me. And I'm going to still live by these laws and make sacrifices for God's laws, because I made up my mind. And regardless of where I'm at, things will not have, that negative energy won't affect me. Instead, I'll be like Abraham, and my positive energy will affect those who I'm around, because this is what I talk about, and this is what I entertain, even with people who do not live this way of life. And if they choose to burn off, so be it. But this is me. This is who I am. I'm the seed of Isaiah. God made a pact with my father and said, my word shall not depart out of the mouth of thy seed or thy seed's seed forever. And his word is surely in my mouth. And if it's in my mouth and I don't live by it, then God gonna bang me. And I'm the one got to live with that. I'm the one got to deal with that. And that's what we all need to remind ourselves. I'm not going to be judged for what you know. You might know more than me. I'm going to be judged for what I know. And God knows when you know what's right from wrong. You can't front with God. He knows that our eyes are open to all these commandments. We're not like the nations that don't know. We're not like the nations that were not made privy to the things that are pleasing to the Lord. No, God showed us things, even secret things outside of the law and his ways, and revealing things to us. That now you're going to be held to a higher accountability standard before God. And if you don't hold yourself to that standard, something coming. And if nothing happens, be afraid. Be very afraid. Because he chastises or he corrects those who he loves, as a father chastises the son in whom he delights. And when we do get chastised, don't say, I messed up, God's angry with me. Say, he's disappointed in me. But this is a sign that he loves me. And he wants me to review and reflect in myself and humble myself and bethink myself and turn from my evil ways and improve before him, lest I get cut off in presumptuous sin. You might be doing laws that I'm not doing. But I always say we all wear the same size shoe. You know why? Because I was taught there's no big I's and little U's. So I shouldn't look down at anybody off the bridge of my nose. Instead, I saw a comment my brother Chief Abraham left earlier, and one of the teachers was speaking about the nations and that they don't know, and he put the sad emoji. God don't delight in the death of the wicked. Why should I? If we don't feel anything for people that our God has to destroy, even though he created them, which means he loves them. And if you can't understand that, you better read the Wisdom of Solomon. He said if he had not loved it, he would not have created it. And I don't think none of us wiser than King Solomon. Nah, God hate them. We must not be reading the same book. Or maybe one of us is reading it with a different view. And I think that we need to be mindful of these things. So while we're on this subject, I'm going to go back to my notes here. And since we're an agricultural people and our ways revolve and our observances revolve around harvest times, biblical laws concerning the practice of gleaning. Early Israelite law integrated agricultural survival with social welfare, meaning we integrated our survival based on how fruitful our crop was with social welfare, looking out for those that don't have. Tobit said it best. You got a little, give a little. If you got a lot, give accordingly. If thou hast abundance, give accordingly. Some of us ain't giving nothing. I don't know him. I ain't getting jacked. Let's go dig deeper here. During the frantic spring harvest, fields were not to be completely gleaned by its owners. The Torah mandated welfare provisions directly out of the crop of every man's yield. The corners of the field, the peah, property owners were legally forbidden. Peah is the word for corners in Hebrew when you say shall not reap the corners of your field. Property owners were legally forbidden from harvesting all the way to the edges of their grain fields. The standing grain in the corners had to be left untouched for the disadvantaged. For example, the poor, the stranger, the widow, and the fatherless or unprotected child or orphan, because that's what yatum means, to harvest for themselves. So this was different to where somebody came to eat in your field and they could only eat while they're there until they're full and then leave. No, this was a time when during harvest time, You had to leave the corners of your field so that they wouldn't have to come all the way inside to eat. They could pass by your field on the edges, on the payah of the field, and be able to gather some for their own harvest because they didn't have a field. And if you think we expected them to chew on some hard, dry grains in the middle of the field, or bring right there and grind it down with their millstone, and then bake bread right there before they left the field with the risk of burning down your entire field, then we're not paying attention to what we read. We are supposed to leave enough for them to grab and take to harvest for themselves, not just to eat while they're in my field. Hey, brother, you can't be taking a doggy bag. Stop trying to equate our culture with American culture. Let's understand what the book is trying to teach us on how we're supposed to look out for the disadvantaged people that are amongst us. You see how I put that? I didn't say of our people. I said that are amongst us, because we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that too. There's proof throughout the whole book. And I ain't just talking about Leviticus chapter 19, verses 31 through 33. Gleaning, the leket, is what it's called, leket. Harvesters cutting barley at high speeds inevitably drop stalks. Law forbade the reapers from turning back to pick them up. They had to be left on the ground for the poor, the widow, and the fatherless, unprotected child or orphan. The forgotten sheaf, called the shikha, right? And is what it's called in Hebrew. If a bundle of tied barley was accidentally left behind in the field, why is it always barley? And it's always mentioning that throughout the Torah. We got to read the Hebrew. If a bundle of tied barley was accidentally left in the field after the carts were loaded, the owner could not return to retrieve it. It was commanded to be left for the poor, the stranger, the widow, and the fatherless or unprotected child or orphan. The narrative example of this is the social safety. This social safety net is the central plot narrative in the book of Ruth, where Ruth, a destitute foreign widow, because she was a Moabitess, survives by following behind the harvesters of Boaz to collect barley that Boaz commanded them to drop specifically for her. He didn't say she a Moabitess, she ain't our people. Oh, but everybody heard about her, how faithful she was to Naomi. So that's why he did that. He didn't know who she was. Let's go read that back again. Because if you go to the book of Ruth, he'll ask later, who is that woman? Right? Leave some for her. And then he said, who is that woman? And they told him who was the woman. It was specifically left for her. Yes, okay, she was known in the community. Good. Now, let's figure out. Because I kept hearing for years that the Gir is the sojourner that lives amongst us, even though we learn differently in Leviticus chapter 19, verses 31 to 33. Even though we learn differently in those verses, because it says, if the sojourner amongst you, once he decides to stay, then he's going to be counted as the homeborn. And the word for the sojourner is the Gir, which means he wasn't counted as the homeborn until he decided to stay and get circumcised. But yet he was still living amongst us. He was sojourning because the Gir is for a time, right? It's for a time. It's a sojourning is for a time, but it also means to dwell. It sure does. And this is where context comes in. And this is why we need more context. So let's go to 2 Chronicles chapter 2. Uh-oh, I lost the page. Hold on one second. Closed by mistake. I'll bring it back open. Here we go. 2 Chronicles chapter 2. Let's go to the end of the chapter, verse 16. Tamshi.
Verse 16.
This is when Solomon is building the temple, right? There were men of Tyre there, or rather say, a man who was the son of a woman of the daughters of Dan, and his father was a man of Tyre. Okay. Again, how did that happen? How did this daughter of Dan marry a man of Tyre without violating? Because we were not supposed to, well, this was not one of the nations that we were commanded not to marry. But if we were commanded not to marry outside of our tribe or outside of our people, how could this happen? Right? Unless he was amongst us and chose to dwell amongst us and is now treated like the homeborn, just as Uriah the Hittite was, which is why Ithiel gave his daughter Bathsheba to him to wife. Because now, even though he's a Hittite, he's no longer counted as one of the 7 nations that God commanded us not to give our daughters to. But instead, he was accepted and given permission to marry the daughters of Israel. Wouldn't have given it to him if he wasn't circumcised and if he wasn't now counted as a homeborn with the same rights as the homeborn. Come here. You want to sit down now? You think you can maintain? All right, go ahead. All right, sit up and pay attention. Don't get too comfortable. All right, let's go to verse 16. This is the time of the building of the temple that Solomon built.
And we will cut wood.
What? Oh, my bad. Verse 17 in the King James Version. Go ahead.
And Solomon numbered all the strangers that were in the land of Israel.
All the who? All the strangers that were in the land. Oh, it says Giri'im. Ha-Giri'im. Ha-Giri'im. So now we got to check that word. Because Gir is the root. So we say numbered all the strangers that were in the land of Israel.
And Solomon numbered all the strangers that were in the land of Israel after the numbering wherewith David his father had numbered them, and they were found 150,000 and 3,600.
You telling me we had 153,600 of these Giri'im in the land in the time of Solomon. And he sets 70,000 of them to bear burdens. So that's 70,000 of them to bear burdens, 80,000 to be hewers in the mountains, which is 80,000 to be hewers, right? And 3,600 overseers to set the people at work. He set them to be overseers. Oh, you see, they weren't just workers. Some of them were given the title of overseers, so they must have been the Giri'im who kept the laws and were all circumcised. At what point do we stop calling them Gir? At what point are they treated as the homeborn? Okay, well, Leviticus 19 tells us that, but let's dig into the definition of a Gir so that we can get a better understanding of this. Okay. Because I want to know. I want to know how I'm supposed to look and treat people. Because we live in a land where we're the strangers. So because I'm the stranger and there's no other Israelites near me, I can't give to the people around me if I see poor around me. Or I must Venmo or Zelle my Hebrew brothers only. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not what God is teaching us in having a heart like unto his. So the Gir means, in this dictionary here, a sojourner or a proselyte, right? And a sojourner, it says here specifically in this dictionary, gives us context. 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 16. Isn't that where we were just reading from? Okay. And it says specifically that the word for Giri'im, which is a conjugated form of Gir, means sojourner, a temporary dweller, or a newcomer with no inherited rights. You see, as opposed or opposite to the homeborn, mentioned in Exodus 12, Leviticus 24, Numbers 15, Joshua chapter 8, as opposed to the homeborn. So the same ones that is mentioned in these chapters, also in the law, is telling us that these were sojourners who were temporary dwellers, newcomers with no inherited rights. Now, how is this determined? because of the law, and in other parts of the book, we see where we were called the stranger. And in those parts, the word gir is used. And we were not permanent dwellers who decided to live like the people of the land. We were temporary sojourners. Why is it different for us? And why is it only different when it comes time to give somebody or help somebody? And this is what these laws concerning gleaning and harvest times is trying to teach us, to have a heart for our brethren. So going back to the whole title of this teachings, that the calendar teaches us that we're an agricultural people, and our culture as an agricultural people is, for one, to give thanks to God and recognize who the crop came from, and then do with what he commanded for us to do with it, and also provide for the people who are strangers that are amongst us, the 150,000 specifically that was amongst us in the time of Solomon. If we got to read here a little, read there a little, don't say we didn't have none amongst us. It's right here, man. But we want to argue with definitions. We want to argue and say, I ain't got to give them nothing. I didn't learn that from my teacher. I didn't need to look this up in the book, because I saw my teacher give to people that didn't have fringes on. And it's not all of them that he knew from back in the days. It was strangers sometimes. So what you going to tell me? I'm wrong now if I give somebody outside of my people? When the book tells us that alms make an atonement for sins, when giving to the poor was commanded us by God, and we see that we had poor that were amongst us. Listen, there's another chapter, I believe it's Deuteronomy 14, where he says, and the poor will never cease out of the land, right? And then before that, in the same chapter, he tells us, and there shall be found no poor among you. So no poor among us, meaning there will be a time when none of us are poor. But since God said in the same chapter where there will never cease to pour out of the land, he don't speak in riddles. So that means at that time when there will be no poor amongst us, like in the time of Solomon, we will have poor amongst us that is not us. That is not amongst us. That is not of the seed of Jacob. But they will still be in our land, because they will never cease out of the land. Why? To remind us that we must do with our crop what God commanded us to do, and in harvest time, and look out for the poor, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, and the disadvantaged people. And if you ain't got that type of heart, you see, my brother said something today that is true. He said the laws of God and the ways of God is two different things. But you know what I've learned? That if you keep the laws of God without bias, without prejudices, without discrimination, without your own perception or adding your own logic to it, but just do what the words say, eventually, well, what my teacher taught me, it will change hearts, minds, and actions. And by just doing it, even though you may not see the point in it or agree with it fully, but just following the words exactly the way they're written, eventually you will begin to walk in the ways of God, because it will change and transform your heart into a new heart. That part is up to us. We can't ask God for a new heart like King David did and then expect God just to miraculously while you sleeping, okay, I'm going to do some surgery on him and give him a new heart in the spirit. And then you wake up righteous. It don't work like that. You have to put the work in. And if we're asking God for these things, and we're asking every day to remove pride far from me, right? Keep back my hands from presumptuous iniquities. Open my heart to thy law and let my soul pursue thy commandments. But I'm not putting in the work and the effort to force myself to do these things, even though I haven't fully gotten you know why we haven't gotten the full understanding of these words? Because we block ourselves by adding our own perceptions when we read it. And see, that don't mean that. No, that means this. And it always comes to where it's the part where we're supposed to show love and do good to somebody. That's when we say it don't go like that. I got to check myself. I got to look inside myself. Why am I full of so much rejection when it comes to what I'm supposed to do to give? Why I'm only looking about what's supposed to come to me? See, I told you, the law said you owe. You got to pay me back. See, the law say you got to make it good because I did good for you. But why is it never on the opposite end that I put myself. That it say it's up to me to make amends. It's up to me to show love. It's up to me to show that I understand the heart of God and show the heart of God to others through my actions. That's why we read the law and we can't perceive it. That's why it says wisdom cometh through the performance of the law, but I'm still bearing grudges against my brothers. I'm still in competition. It's not a competition. The only one you competing with is the one you look in the mirror every day. And that's the only one that you can improve and be better than, and it actually give points before God. Because if you better than me and you prove that you better than me because you're doing more law than me or I'm still wicked, you don't get points for that. I got to pay for what my deficiencies with God and the law. You got to pay for your deficiencies with God and his laws. That's why I say we all wear the same size shoe. You know what gur also means, which is part of the definition from the root word gir, to stir up strife, quarrel. To stir up strife and quarrel. Now, this is what I learned. You could blow on the spark and it will ignite. You could spit on it and it will extinguish it. And both of these come out of your mouth. So we could look at this and say, yeah, that's because the stranger's always been stirring up strife. Remember the mixed multitude in the wilderness? Or we could say, maybe God doesn't want us stirring up strife and quarreling with the strangers. Maybe that word means that because the gir and a sojourner are usually associated with stirring things up. And so automatically I'm defensive against them. You ain't one of us. It's a problem. It's only a problem when we follow them. It's not a problem if our ways influence them. If the way we live inspires them because we are the ones to show ourselves friendly. Prince Jacob said, the whole purpose of this way of life is to make friends and influence people into a better way of life. When did we stop upholding that principle? Or because he died, we ain't talking about that no more? I'm still talking about it. And his name is still mentioned in the beginning of every single teachings. You know why? Because my teacher talked about him all the time. And me being around my teacher for so long, for so much, every single day rubbed off on me. And he taught me principles of loyalty, principles of upholding legacies, principles of how your name will be marked in the heavens because it doesn't die with you. You give your life to uphold these principles. You give your life even if everybody's against you. Imagine me being afraid to speak what the book said is right. Imagine somebody putting fear in me to not speak what the book said is right, or to correct somebody else, or to uphold myself to those same standards and say, as I spit these words, they cut me as well as whoever else is cutting right now. Imagine me acting like I'm above the law. We got to get it right, man. This book is teaching us the heart to have. And we need to stop fighting ourselves. So back to these notes here. The cultural dedication of agricultural festivals. There's a lot to learn. Early Israelite faithfulness tightly bound our physical sustenance to our spiritual connection through obedience to God. Let me read that again. Early Israelite faithfulness. Our faithfulness is how much we believe in God and how trustworthy we are in his eyes. Tightly bound our physical sustenance. Basically, how he gives us sustenance to sustain our lives. How much our crop grows, whether there's going to be a drought, whether the barley's going to ripen in time, or whether there's even going to be a crop to ripen. To our spiritual connection through obedience to God, because our spiritual connection is based on our obedience to him. We can't be so spiritually inclined and I'm in tune with wisdom and I'm not obedient. That's why wisdom coming through the performance of the law, because you have to prove yourself worthy through obedience first before he could trust us with the treasures that come with wisdom. Before he give us the understanding, we have to prove ourselves that we will understand, which is to depart from evil, before he gives us the understanding of the law. And you do that by blind allegiance. You do what the words say before you agree with them. You force yourself to do what the law says before you see the logic in it, before you say, that makes sense to me. It don't have to make sense to you. You know why? Because we coming from a different walk of life. I don't care if you was born in this way of life. You grew up in America. You grew up with a certain mentality. We were taught ways, just even if you want to use the calendar for an example, we was raised in this way of life as Americans, if you was born in this way of life. Those of us that was born practicing the ways of the nations, and by the way, I ain't calling them heathen, because I read it's called going in the book, and that means nations. Heathen is a loose translation that King James gave it, as if he's more righteous than thou. And I don't know to mean that. I mean, it's the same word for nations, which means an actual nation of people. And then later on, you read it in a context where it's translated as heathen. Who decided that? Translators, not God, because it's going. It's one word. You can look it up in the dictionary and it says nations, but the book tells us what words mean. And from what I read, God wasn't into just degrading people unless there was a certain rebuke happening where he had to tell us about ourselves through the words of his prophets. And even then, he spit the truth exactly the way it was. He didn't use derogatory words to hurt our feelings. What hurt our feelings is that to find out that he's disappointed with us and he's looking to punish us. And now he's warning us because of our disobedience. That's what's supposed to hurt. Why are you supposed to honor your parents and it's supposed to matter so much? Because you're supposed to feel a way about disappointing them. Not just scared if you get caught and catch the whooping. But if they find out I'm a liar. Every time I said I love them, I'm lying. Every time I said, I believe you, Abba, I believe you, Ima. I believe you, Mom. I believe you, Dad. I lied because they found out that I broke the same thing that they was teaching me behind their backs. That's what we should be more afraid of. That's when it said, fear every man his father and mother. Don't only fear the belt. Don't only fear the makkah. Fear disappointing them. That was one thing that we could learn from Cain, that was righteousness. He was torn apart, that he lost favor in God's eyes. We don't have that. We don't feel bad. We don't feel bad because I treated somebody wrong that wasn't in correlation with the commandments. We say, well, it's because he did this and this and that. So we're not looking at God going, as he's looking at us going, come on, man, you know better than that. You disappoint me. We don't fear that. You know when we fear? When we get banged. You know when we fear? When we get sick. You know when we fear? When we go to jail. You know when we fear? When we lose our job. When you lose your place to live. When you get in a car accident and it's totaled. Even if you don't get hurt. This is what we fear. We fear the chastisement. We don't fear that we disappointed him to the point where he had to chastise us because we refused to humble ourselves and improve before him. A wise man knows when he slippeth. Stop fronting, man. We know we doing wrong. You don't need nobody to tell you. You just need to be honest with yourself. I know where I'm going wrong. Ain't no sense in me sitting up here fronting. That's why you hear me make myself an example. I don't have no problem pulling the covers off. I'll show you. Yeah, I ain't got it right yet. I'm transgressing. You know why? Because when I put myself on blast, I feel bad. You know why? Because I've come to terms with myself deep down inside. I fear man more than I fear God. I care what you guys think about me more than I care about what God think about me. because I hear your words and I don't hear God's words. I hear people talking, but I don't hear what God's saying in the heavens about me. And that bothers me more. And that's backwards. I'm just being honest with myself. So I'm going to put myself on blast. I take all the teachers personal. Whether I know the teacher is saying something that steps on me, or I know he's stepping on somebody else, and maybe he stepped on me and wasn't intentionally stepping on me, but even though he's talking about a law that I'm not violating, I still go, I still got to uphold myself to that principle. Just because I ain't violating it now, at one time I did. And who's to say that I can't slip? It's how you remain in our humility. And this is how God could teach us. This is how he can continue to teach us and guide us. The festivals were not just community parties. The festivals, the feast days were not just community parties. And I want to emphasize community. We had a community. When I observed the Feast of Unleavened Bread, ain't nobody in here but me, my wife, and my 2 boys. And that's why I be trying to call y'all. Everybody having so much fun over there together. At least you got siblings to come over to your house and eat unleavened bread with. And I'm over here like, man, just somebody answer the phone, please, man. Just put me on video. At least I can feel right. Just last time I said, just put the phone in the chair, just so I can feel like I'm sitting there. Because when you by yourself, you got to make the best of it. And I got to make it fun for my family, who's like, wow, this is it. This is all. This is what it is. This is it. Ain't too much fun in this. I got to make it fun. We got to play games. I got to play music. We dance. I got to make it fun. I got to be the life of the party. Lest my family feel like this way of life is nothing but restrictions and prison. So it's up to us to make this thing fun. Why is it such a thing where everybody just want to go home? If we all in the same place, why we ain't in the same place? Why everybody not partying together? It's more than just a community party. They were highly structured cultural practices designed to manage the nation's relationship with God. Why we keep forgetting the new moon every month? I don't forget it. I give me my drink. But we ain't throwing no structured cultural practice designed to manage our nation's relationship with God, to remind ourselves why we observe it. Just a time and excuse for me to get drunk. I'm honest with myself. Who was viewed as the true owner? God, viewed as the true owner, divine provider, who causes the produce of the land to grow or not, the sole sustainer of our lives. This is what the feast days was about, acknowledging these things. He's always just going to be, well, I'm going to go over this stuff and talk about the calendar. And man, this is boring, man. Where's he going with all of this? We got a messed up mentality of who we are. We forgot that we the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We forgot that our culture is the whole purpose of our culture is to teach us gratitude and thankfulness. That's why you're reading the Apocrypha where the angel told Ezra, talking about the wicked, that they're going to suffer punishments in the pit. It said because they were unthankful to him that prepared life for them. So in these laws, he teaches to appreciate life and everything that he gives us. And I'll say it again. You got socks, man. You got socks. Some people ain't never owned those a day in their life. You got shoes. Some people don't own those a day in their life. And the same children that don't have a socks or shoes, that ain't owned one or a pair in their entire life, whose floor on inside their house is dirt, is somewhere smiling right now and don't even know where his next meal coming from. We over here bickering amongst ourselves, unthankful, chasing after our own lusts, using the excuse of the feast day, not remembering that we show thankfulness and gratitude to God through our actions of how we treat people. That's what the gleaning is about. That's what the harvest is about. That's what these feast days are about, the harvest times. Shavuot, Festival of Weeks, celebrated exactly 7 weeks after the initial barley harvest, after the Feast of Unleavened Bread, on the morrow after the Shabbat. Shavuot marked the completion of the grain cycle with the wheat harvest. Thankfulness at its core. It is focused heavily on gratitude and the nation's dedication to God. Farmers brought the bikurim, the first fruits of the harvest, to the central sanctuary. Instead of taking credit for a successful yield, farmers publicly confessed Israel's history as a wandering Syrian, rescued people dependent entirely on God's provision. We recount our history as our father was a wandering Syrian, a rescued people out of bondage because he saved us out of Egypt, dependent entirely on God's provision. When you start to recognize that everything you have come from God, then you start to show more thankfulness in how much of it you share. If you're keeping it all for yourself, you ain't thankful to God. You think it's yours. The covenant link. In Exodus 19:1, we read that the Israelites came to the foot of Mount Sinai in the 3rd month, which is the month of Siwan, also the month of Shavuot. The Torah commands that we should begin counting the Omer on the morrow after the Shabbat, following the Feast of Unleavened Bread. 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. When it says 7 weeks, it says 7 Sabbaths in Hebrew. And unto the morrow after the 7th Shabbat shall ye number 50 days. Leviticus 23:15 and 16 is what I just read, which is the Feast of Weeks. The word Shavuot is also translated as oaths. Some scholars believe that it was on that day that God came down upon Mount Sinai when he spake the 10 commandments in the ears of all Israel, because that's what it tells us in Exodus chapter 19:1, that it was in the month of Siwan. So scholars say that it happened on that day because Shavuot doesn't only mean weeks, it also means oaths, or else we would have called it Shabtot, because you're supposed to count 7 Sabbaths. But instead of calling us Shabtot, we call it Shavuot, which doesn't only mean weeks, it means oaths, to commemorate the time when he spoke the 10 commandments in the ears of all Israel, the only time in history, in the history of the world, that God spoke to an entire nation of people all at once. When God swore Shavuot of eternal faithfulness to Israel, and Israel became God's people on that day. Sukkot, the festival of booths, celebrated in the autumn. This festival marked the end of the agricultural year. Hear it? The end of the agricultural year, when all grapes, olives, and late summer crops, pomegranates, citrus fruits were gathered from the presses and fields. The date palm, a memorial of gratitude. It focused on vulnerability and dependence. For 7 days, families moved out of their sturdy stone houses into handmade vernacular bushcraft booths, or sukkot, made of date palm branches and the boughs of thick trees. Of when God delivered Israel out of the slavery in Egypt, and we dwelt in booths in the wilderness for 40 years. The dual purpose. In practicality, it kept farmers close to their fields during the critical final harvest push. Culturally, it stripped away the material security, forcing people to remember the desert wanderings where they had no permanent land and survived only because of the divine protection of God. So even though you're living in security in your field and you're able to manage your harvest, you're in that booth reminding yourself of when you did not have sustenance and you relied on God every day when he fed us with manna, when he brought water out of the rock. How and why the months were named. There were only 10 months named throughout the Tanakh. Some were named by God, as recorded by Moses in the Torah, while others were named by our fathers, specifically the post-exilic generation of Israelites that returned to the land of Judea following the 70-year captivity in Babylon, who were heavily influenced by Babylonian culture, mysticism, and religion. These months were named after Babylonian gods and goddesses. In contrast, others were given Hebrew names, adopting a false cognate, which is a word that sounds similar but does not share a common meaning in another language, from words either in Babylonian or Akkadian, root words that sounded similar to the Hebrew word used for the name that deeply corresponds to both seasonal and or cultural practices and observances, which we will explain shortly. And finally, other names of months not mentioned in the Torah were referenced by our fathers, the scribes, who recorded them in other books of the Tanakh before the Babylonian captivity. Mind you, these scribes were handpicked by God. All the ones that wrote in the book of Kings, all the scribes that wrote the book of Chronicles. God knew what he was doing. He don't make mistakes. And therefore, without evidence in the Tanakh to dispute their validity, these latter, the ones named in other parts of the book besides the Torah, before we went into Babylon, should be recognized as part of the ancestral cultural knowledge of our fathers, the ancient Hebrews. Abib, the first month, which means fresh spring, first shoots, first ripening of the barley, or the stage of the first ripening of the barley harvest. Mentioned in Exodus 13, Exodus 23, Deuteronomy 16. The time of barley harvest. Abib was later changed to Nisan, not mentioning the name because it's named after the Babylonian god, applied after the 70-year Babylonian captivity. Even though you see that name on calendars today, God called this time the month of the Abib, not necessarily naming it Abib, the time of the first ripening stage of the barley harvest. That's what it's really called. We need to start thinking in Hebrew, stop thinking in English. We just speak English, but we think Hebrew. So if you want to call the name of the month according to the name that God called it in the Torah, when he mentioned it as Ha-Abib throughout 4 or 5 different chapters in the Torah, Ha-Abib, we should be calling it the month of the first ripening stage of the barley harvest. That's what it means. You can say Ha-Abib, and that refers to that in one word. Ziv or Ziu, the second month, meaning radiance or light, because this is the time when after the rains, and it started, or during the rains time, and the light would break through the clouds, right? Okay, so Siwan, which is the third month, you're breaking out of the rainy season now, where it's light coming through now, no more cloudy days in Zu, and Siwan in Zu is how you pronounce it, and Siwan, not Sivan, Siwan, which is the third month, which means season or seasonal time. By the way, it's called Zu in 1 Kings chapter 6. The third month, Siwan, which means season or seasonal time, was the wheat harvest, the time of Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. And you can read about that in Esther, or it's mentioned in Esther chapter 8. During early Israelite settlement of ancient Canaan, now mind you, this is also after the time of the Babylonian captivity, because Esther was the time of the Persian Medes Empire. But this name correlates with what was happening according to the meaning of what it was called. Now, we're going to get to that in a second. During the early Israelite settlement of Canaan, of ancient Canaan, the average barley harvest lasted 2 to 3 weeks for an individual farm, but the national harvest window spanned 6 to 7 weeks, which is why we count the Omer for 7 weeks. The entire region, due to Canaan's varied geography, some brought the Abib for their first fruits, and some brought the Carmel for their first fruits. But all the first fruits were brought at that same time on the morrow after the Shabbat, right? And then later the wheat harvest after on the 50th day, right? Because elevation dictated ripening seeds, we went through all of that. Cultural and agricultural impact. There was a 7-week window in early Israelite culture. This period was formalized as the 49-day counting of the Omer, the 50th day which tracked the entire spring grain cycle, starting with the barley reaping at Feast of Unleavened Bread, and ending with the wheat harvest at Shavuot. Within any village, single village, families had a narrow 14 to 21 day window to reap, bind, and protect the barley before the grain dried out too much and shattered off the stalk, because it was also windy season on these higher plains. And they also used that wind in the threshing of the wheat or of the barley. When it was certain times, they would winnow it, and the wind would blow off the barley seed out of the shaft. Or unseasonable late rains ruin the crop. And then the rest of the book mentions the 4th month, the 5th month, and that's is not by name. It just calls it 4th month and 5th month. That's in 1 Chronicles 27. And then verses 7 and 8. Zakaryah chapter 8 mentions the 4th month and the fast of the 5th month. Zakaryah chapter 7 also. Moving on to the month of Elul, the 6th month. We can see where these months had names. Okay, Elul, the 6th month, having no clear literal meaning in Hebrew, but represents an acronym later applied, which comes from the Song of Solomon that says, I am my beloved and my beloved is mine. And that's an acronym. We're not going by that. because God didn't tell us that that was the name. Neither did Solomon. The name was adopted after the Babylonian captivity, possibly from an Akkadian word meaning harvest, a time of ingathering and preparation, mentioned in Nehemiah chapter 6. Itanim, the 7th month, also a time of harvest and ingathering. The name means strong flowing or ever flowing streams or permanent brooks, from the root word etan, the name Ethan, meaning strong, mighty, or everlasting. The name was later changed to Tishri after the Babylonian captivity. Exodus 23:16 refers to the Feast of Tabernacles in the 7th month as the Feast of Ingathering at the end of the year, when in fact there were 12 months at the time. We proved that last week in the way we counted, according even back in the time of Noah, knowing that there were 30-day months. And if we counted only 7 months, then something will be wrong, because then Abib will be showing up in fall. So this is where understanding the Hebrew language is key to understanding our culture as an agricultural people. The Hebrew word betzeit, means at the going out, is the word that is used in Exodus 23:16 when it says at the end of the year. So betzeit is at the going out, at the exit of, or at the end. In Exodus 23, it appears in the phrase betzeit hashanah, which is most commonly translated as at the end of the year in the KJV and other translations. However, in this verse, the phrase is used to mark the timing for the festival of ingathering, also known as Sukkot, or the Feast of Booths, which took place in autumn. The root comes from the Hebrew word yatzah, meaning to go out, to depart, or to come forth. In grammar, the prefix, so it could be the coming forth, right, of the year, the departure of the year. Now, what does it mean? In grammar, the prefix beit, the B sound, means in or at, making the combined word mean in or at the going out of. In context, it refers to the conclusion of the agricultural year, just before the rainy winter season begins, when all final crops have been gathered from the fields. The final going out of the year, seeing as there would be no more going out to harvest crops for the rest of the year, as the 7th month marked the last of the sunny days preceding the rainy season. Some scholars note that this is the reasoning for interpreting the phase betzeit hashanah as at the departure of the year, signifying the completion of the annual harvest cycle, as well as the end of the festival observances until the following year. This seasonal ending of the harvest year later set the tone for the post-exilic Israelites who corrupted and modified the calendar after returning from the Babylonian captivity, when they implemented a fall agricultural new year, which cooperatively roughly coincided with the Babylonian New Year around October 5th or 6th. While maintaining the directive of the Torah, citing Abib as the beginning of the year, but now they're counting a new year during the month of Tishri, is what they named it, the 7th month. And this is where they get Rosh Hashanah from, right? Don't blame the Jewish man. Our fathers started that coming out of Babylon, because we wanted to celebrate the Babylonian New Year, which was at the same time of year, around October 5th or 6th in today's calendar. The month Bul, the 8th month of the ancient Hebrew calendar. And this is where we understand the names of the rest of the months, is going to tell us why this is referred to at the going out of the year of the 7th month, which marks the start of the rainy season around October or November. So the rainy season begins the start of something. The end of this harvest time marks the end of something. So when it's talking about at the end of the year, it's in reference to the harvest year and the last feast day that we're observing, because there'll be no more for the rest of the year. There'll be no more going out to harvest crops for the rest of the year, but the beginning of the rainy season. And it comes from the root word meaning produce or outgrowth. In 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 38 states that the temple was finished in the 11th month, in the month of Bul, which is in the 8th month. So it was called the month of Bul in the time of Kings before we went into Babylon. It was named by our fathers who God chose to be scribes, right? Or they knew something we don't know, that it was passed down. Kislev, the 9th month of the ancient Hebrew calendar. The name comes from the Hebrew word kasal, which means to trust, to hope, or security, to rely on God. It is the coldest time of the year, when the days were shortest and the nights were longest, around November and December in the Gregorian calendar. And it's mentioned in Nehemiah 1, Zakaryah 7. And why is a time where we support, why it signifies hope and trust and security to rely on God? Because during this time, we had to rely on God when it was cold and rainy for survival, that it didn't destroy some of our homes, who was also made out of mud, right, at that time, or some of our storehouses that contained our grain from the successful harvest that God gave us. Again, we relied on God. Tebet, the 10th month, derived from an Akkadian word meaning sinking or muddy, reflecting the rainy, wet season around December or January. On the first day of the 10th month were the tops of the mountains seen, as the waters decreased from off the earth after the flood of Genesis. That's why it's called sinking or muddy. This is not something that was named later. So even though it don't tell us when it was named, and it mentioned in the book of Esther, chapter 2, we could see that it signifies the same thing that happened after the flood. And that's what it was named after. It is also significant in history, marking the events of the siege of Jerusalem, the fast of the 10th month. You're doing a lot over there. You going ahead or are you paying attention? Why are you messing with this? Did I ask you to go somewhere? Okay, so the rule is when the teacher speak, your eyes on the teacher. When the teacher say read, your eyes in the book. In this case, on the tablet, on the laptop. Understand? So you're doing too much right here for you to be paying attention. Shebat, properly pronounced Shebat, the 11th month. Linguistically, the calendar month. This is where we have another false cognate, and we're going to understand a little bit more about why it was named these things, how these months got their names, even after the Babylonian captivity, because all of them were named after gods. Shebat, properly pronounced Shebat, the 11th month. I like this one. Linguistically, the calendar month named Shebat is not a native Hebrew word, but an Akkadian, Babylonian loan word adopted during this Jewish exile in Babylon. This was originally, right? It has a Hebrew false cognate, which means a word that sounds the same, but means something different in Hebrew. In ancient Akkadian, the month was called Sabbatu, which means to strike or to lash. This referred to the heavy driving winter rains and fierce windstorms that beat down on the earth during this season, late January to February. When the post-exilic Jews adopted the name, this is the generation that came out of Babylon, when we adopted the name, it sounded identical to the Hebrew word Shebat, which means staff or branch, because Hebrew culture heavily utilizes phonetic wordplay, as we consistently see throughout the Psalms of King David and the Proverbs of King Solomon, and also the words of God himself and the messages delivered at the mouth of his prophets. For example, Isaiah chapter 5, verse 7. Hebrew sages and farmers naturally linked the month to the Hebrew meanings of staff, tribe, and resting. All of them come from the root word Shebat or Shabbat. In accordance with the meaning of Shebat as a staff, there is a cultural seasonal significance regarding shepherding, because we were shepherds. In the ancient Near East, the late winter month of Shebat was a pivotal and intense time for shepherds. The imagery of the Shebat, a shepherd's staff, manifests in several ways during this season. Counting and tithing animals. A shepherd used their Shebat to count sheep, famously referenced in the Bible as passing animals under the rod. Leviticus 27, verse 32. Late winter was primarily lambing season. Shepherds used their staff to count the newborn spring lambs, separating them for safety and calculating future tithes. And they did this at that time to see which ones survived. And now you can get a good count of your increase of your flock during the rainy season. Protection from predators. January and February brought cold, dark, and wet conditions. Wild predators like wolves or leopards in ancient Israel were hungrier and bolder. The shepherd relied heavily on his Shebat, his staff, as a defensive weapon to strike predators and protect the vulnerable flock. Finding pasture. During the heavy rains of Shebat, the wilderness began to turn green. A shepherd used their staff to guide the flock safely away from the flooded mud valleys toward the fresh, budding vegetation on the hillsides. In connection to trees and agricultural, Shebat also means shoot or growing branch, new shoots or the growing branch. It perfectly mirrors the agricultural activities of this specific month. Shebat, the awakening of sap. In Israel, Shabbat marks the exact turning point where winter rains have thoroughly saturated the ground. Deep inside the trees, the sap begins to rise, and the very first winter buds appear on new shoots or growing branches. The botanical significance. In the land of Israel, the almond tree, the shaked, meaning the early waker. This is what the almond tree is called, the early waker. That's the word for almond tree. Is famously the very first tree to bloom at the end of winter. Its beautiful white flowers typically erupt in the month of Shebat, late January or early February. The traditional inference, because the miracle of Aaron's rod mirrored the natural life cycle of an almond tree, bringing forth buds and blossoms with ripe almonds, accelerated over a single night. The event is heavily associated with the transition from winter to spring, when almonds budded as the first fruits. Culturally, this links the imagery of that miraculous event directly to the new Hebrew month of Shebat. If we look at the other meaning of Shabbat or Shebat, means to sit, to rest in, or cease action, stemming from the root Shabbat. It perfectly describes the seasonal lifestyle of the ancient Levant during this time of the year. The ancient Levant refers to the historical region spanning from the eastern Mediterranean, covering the modern-day Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, and the western Syria, as a vital land bridge between Africa and Asia. So regardless of what you have, some teachers out there, Israelite is a black nation and it's in Africa. It's geologically or geographically not accurate according to where it's located. It is in the land bridge between Africa and Asia. This area was a cradle of early civilization known as the Fertile Crescent. It also serves as the birthplace of agriculture, the alphabet, and major monotheistic religions, where nations started serving one God. Oh, wow, such a coincidence, where Abraham became the father of many nations, and he's the first one of his era to say, hey, I'm going to serve one God, where everybody else was serving multiple gods, right? And you only looked at as strong as how many gods you served, right? But in Abraham's time, he was a trendsetter, where he lived in a place where no one was like him. And he lived a lifestyle that no one lived. And he did it all by himself and commanded his household to do so in the midst of the people, right? And because of that, he was known as Abraham the Hebrew, following the ways of the house of Eber, which had been lost through generations because nobody was keeping it except in the region of where Eber or the Eberites dwelled. Which is how you say Hebrew in Hebrew. Ibri literally translates to Eberite. Why? Because he's one of the sons, great-grandson of Shem, that continue following the ways of his father Shem, who continue following the ways of his father Noah, who was following in the ways of God, as we read that he was perfect and upright in his generation. This is how come later on, we find out that certain men of the families of Abraham knew how to offer offerings, like Jethro, because the men of that region became monotheistic, right? Because they were the children of Abraham. Nestled between the Mediterranean Sea in the west and the Arabian Desert to the east. The ancient Levant featured a varied topography of coastal plains, the deep Syro-African rift, including the Jordan River and Dead Sea, the inland mountains. Because of its position, it acted as a dynamic corridor rather than an isolated backwater, heavily influencing international trade networks. All right, I could go into the nations that inhabited the area. I'm going to skip that. How other meanings of Shabbat relate to seasonal events and the cultural lifestyle of the Hebrews. It enforced rest for farmers. Shabbat is the peak of the rainy season, often leaving, this is the 11th month, okay? Often leaving the fields too muddy and waterlogged to plow. This is around January, February, to plant or harvest. Farmers were forced into a period of Shebat, a seasonal pause or furlough, when farmers were idled, forced to sit still, waiting out the heavy storms indoors. Winter sheltering for flocks. Because the weather was cold and tempestuous, shepherds could not leave their flocks out in the open wilderness overnight. The sheep were kept sitting, Shebat, in protected stone sheepfolds or caves to stay dry while the shepherd kept watch at the entrance. When you combine these concepts, the month of Shebat is a beautiful transition. It begins with the heavy striking of the rains, which is the Sabbatu translation from Akkadian of winter, forces both man and flocks into temporary indoor rest, Shebat, and ends with the shepherd's Shebat rod, Shebat, guiding new lambs under the freshly budding branches of Shebat of the early spring trees. Also, Moses began his final discourse to the Israelites in the 40th year during this month, as you can read in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 3. And the final month was Adar, 12th month, whose meaning is linked to the root word adir, meaning strength, power, and magnificence, found in Esther chapter 3. It also marks the month of Purim, a time of happiness, celebrating the deliverance and the power and the strength of God, as recorded in the book of Esther, when he delivered our entire nation from being destroyed. So we went over all of this so that we could get a broad understanding of what our culture is like, why the months of the names, why the months have specific names, which were named after Babylonian months. We see Tammuz, right? And Ab, which we don't have here. These names were changed. And we need to understand that these came about because of our doing, our fathers teaching them and changing the calendar first, right? And this is what's ironic about it, is as much as we look at the Gregorian calendar and say, man changed that, man, and Julius Caesar changed it, and then Pope Gregory changed it. Oh, by the way, just so you know how God ended up allowing man to change it, it was not the nations that did it first, it was us that did it first. So when God said, I will take away your Sabbaths and your feast days, right, and your new moons, because we did not keep them properly when he gave them to us, because of that, give me water, please. It's on the counter, that's mine. Because when he gave them to us, we did not keep them. He took them away from us. And how did he do that? We did it to ourselves. When you don't follow God's command, your own person will go against your own soul. Your own person will go against your own spirit. Your own nefesh, which is your person. See, I know it says soul, but it refers to a person. Will go against your own spirit, your own ruach. And this is when sin begin to rule over us, because sin put us in the headlock and it just whispers sweet nothings in our ear. And we follow and we do it without rebuttal, without resistance, without a fight. And this is how we start to come up with new ideas of how we're going to teach the law and corrupt the law and change the ways and adapt to the ways of the new world without digging into who we are as a people, without digging into our culture, without studying this book to find out who we are, how we live, what we're supposed to be doing before God, adhering to these words exactly the way they are commanded, and then God could show us things why later on. Then it just strengthens your belief in God. It just strengthens your fervor with the law. It just strengthens you when you being the only one where you at and you want to stand out and you want to believe everything that you read in this book and keep it to the letter, because regardless of the whole world speaking one thing, we know they're wrong if they ain't speaking according to the word of God. If it don't match up with the Torah, it's a lie. It ain't the truth. Torah, thank you. It ain't the truth. Say, oh man, he had his son serve him the water. Yes, I did. I asked my son to pass me the water. It was a case one time where Chief was teaching us something valuable. And I know he didn't have us do certain things for him on Shabbat. He said, nah, I don't do it. I'll get it myself. There were times where he would still tell me get it himself, depending on the situation. I mean, get it for him, depending on the situation. And I would do it. It's not my biological father, because I read in this book where Ab don't only mean father, it also means guide. And they looked at their teachers and prophets as the Ab, and they served them as such, right? And so I remember one time he wasn't in the room, and Chief Abraham told his little sister, said, hey, cut off the fan or turn on the fan or something like that because she was closest to it. And then Chief came back in the room and he said, who turned off the fan? And Abraham said, I did. I'm sorry. Chief Abraham said, I did. And little Sarah was sitting there like this. Oh, man, I'm about to get in trouble because I did it. But then he said, I did. You know, she like, oh, he had my back. No, but it showed that he learned the lesson that his father taught us, that when we read the book, the one who gave the command is who God's going to charge for the action, right? So if it be where I sent him to get my water, I got the water, right? And even with my wife, if we be one and I tell her to serve me or I serve her today, I ain't violating. And that's what I learned from my teacher, where he would go and bring his wife certain things. He said, I ain't going to ask you to do it, but I'll do it for her and I'll let her do it for me because we won. And that's why I say it's dangerous for us putting stamp on certain things to say, this is what my teacher said, because he said that one time, but because wisdom is so profound and we learn as we go, he taught us different things at different stages so that we may learn a very important principle, that wisdom supersedes the law, because you cannot do the law without wisdom. And every situation calls for wisdom, even when keeping thou shalt and thou shalt not. And that's something where God showed him in certain times when he said, go get that for me. And then I would hesitate. And he like, you ain't violating, son. I know what I said. Go get that for me. And not because he was just switching, flipping back and forth because he was like, I don't feel like getting it, so this time I'm gonna make you feel like it's okay for you to get it for me. No, because there was reasoning behind it, and there was situational circumstances of reasons why I should get it for him, right? And it didn't always mean just because if he was sick or he was hurting, right? So with that said, I think that it's very important that we adhere exactly to the words of the law, but understand that there is a wisdom and a formula in doing all things. And that first we do it exactly according to what the words say. And we have men, thank God, we had a teacher like Chief of Chiefs Eleazar that could drop the jewels on us. And I thank God that I was around him long enough for such a consistently for such a long period of time for him to teach me certain things. And if certain things came about after I left, I thank God that I still have teachers. Yes, teachers, my teachers also. I'm not too proud to say, oh, he was my only teacher. No, I have teachers also, Chief Shammah and Chief Mikael, that if he informed of something different after the fact, that they two together as a consensus could say, yes, he did say that. And these were the examples and the wisdom that he gave us, right? And as teachers, we should all stick together because we receive strict command to stick together, regardless of any discrepancies. And if there are discrepancies, let's go to the book and let's talk about it amongst ourselves so that we could get to the bottom of it, because the purpose is for us all as representatives of the legacy of Chief of Chiefs Eleazar. And I ain't taking nothing from you as his sons. I'm just following the command and the order that he gave me. Just as you have to follow the command and the order that he gave you, that our order is to teach the law clearly according to the words for what they mean, because they mean what they say and they say what they mean. And that unity creates something that nobody could break, because there's a lot of haters out there saying you can't listen to those guys. And we teaching what the books say. And we trying to prevent the flock from being led astray. And instead, if we don't have that unity, it shows a breach in our credibility. So we have this order and responsibility to uphold. So this is why, if you haven't noticed, in the last few weeks or month, instead of just saying, like it says in the book, I'm showing you the verses where it says it. Instead of speaking and saying, this is law, I'm showing you the verses that prove that this is law. Instead of saying, this is the evidence that backs up the law. I'm showing you where I got the evidence. And not only am I not pulling it from an outside source, I'm showing you the same evidence in the book, in the law, or in another part of the book that backs up the resource that I got from outside of the book. And if I can't do that, I'm not going to teach it. And that's the type of dedication and faithfulness that we were commanded to uphold. So I remember certain times when we were given a task, and I know my brothers could vouch for this, Chief Shama and Chief Mikhail could vouch for this, that as Chief of Chief Eleazar would tell us to go look something up, if we didn't come to a definitive answer where we could prove it in the law or in another part of the book and then match it up with the law before that next Shabbat, we couldn't teach it. He would say, nah, we ain't ready to bring this yet. Hold off on that. And we'd have to wait until we dug to the bottom to be able to use the book to prove it before we could actually teach it, or before he would even teach it. Because it wasn't always us bringing something to the table. He brought to us most of the time and told us what to look up. You know, or if we found something in Hebrew, we bring it to him and he would have the stamp on it, put the stamp on it. He was what we have in our times as Moses was to the people in those times. Now that he's not here, we have to be very, very careful to adhere to the method of how he taught us to research and find out the truth, using the book as our foundation of all truth. And if we go outside of that method and that formula, then we start to add our own interpretations, our own perceptions, and we're not upholding the legacy. And there's not the unity and the legacy of our teacher, the last prophet of God, Chief of Chiefs Eleazar, Ben Lewi, Ben Dodo, a.k.a. Matitya, father of the house of the 21st century Maccabees. With that, I hope that everybody was inspired by the evidence that was uncovered in the verses of the Torah that supported the findings that enlightened us concerning our culture and why God commanded us to do certain things, understanding our practices as an agricultural people, as a shepherding people, which is the culture of our fathers, the feast days, why we are commanded to celebrate them, that we should be grateful to our God, giving him the credit for all things that we have, and then show that gratitude by helping and giving towards each other and the less fortunate that are amongst us, or in today's time that we are amongst. I hope that we will all humble ourselves, turn from our evil ways, and walk upright before the Most High our God. I bid you have the ancient tongue of our fathers. Shabbat Shalom Lekem.
Shabbat Shalom.
If we have any, and if anyone has any questions, or if I missed any questions as they appeared in the chat, feel free to type them in. I'll give a minute before I actually shut this down. As always, I offer my email. If you think of something during the week, or you find a piece of evidence that contradicts what I brought, because I'm open to learning, I don't know it all. Just make sure that whatever we bring to the table, it has to be shown in the book. If you find something, or if you have a question about something and you need further clarification, you can email me at Zakaryah, ZAKARYAH.Israel @gmail.com. And I put it in the chat the way it is. You know, the @ is the @ sign. I ain't got to tell you. You know how to write out an email address, just in case, you know, anyone needs to see it spelled out. And you can't put it in there as an email because YouTube will erase the comment. Right? They don't allow links in the comments or in the chat. I try to look for that setting. If anybody knows how to turn that off, let me know, because we should be able to share links with each other. That helps support the evidence that we're sharing. So, with that said, my family, me, my people, love. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.